Hi everyone, so today I'm going to demonstrate and go over some techniques and things for creating a reductive or subtractive charcoal drawing. And we're going to create this drawing on a sheet of paper that we tone ourselves. So we're going to hand tone this paper using charcoal dust in particular. So some materials I've got laid out here. I've got the sheet of paper that my drawing is going to be on. We're going to tone this paper. I've got a respirator. We are working with charcoal and charcoal dust, so it's probably a good idea to protect your lungs, protect your breathing. Got an X-Acto knife we're going to use. Paper towel. Got some nitrile gloves here. You know, if your hands are sensitive to dust, or if you just don't want to get your hands dirty, that might be a good idea. And I've got a little bag here full of little scrap pieces of charcoal. I like to keep these for this purpose here. Never gets too small to use. I throw it in this little baggie, and then I can use them to create charcoal dust later on. You can also buy powdered charcoal. Generals makes a good powdered charcoal here. Mitrum also has some powdered charcoal that you can buy. Works well. But I'm going to show you how to tone your paper using some sticks of charcoal. Another thing I've got here, this does get quite messy, so I've also got a scrap piece of newsprint here that I was just going to toss out, and some old gesture drawings on there. Throw it underneath here to catch all the dust and the mess. You know, you definitely don't want to do this on your kitchen counter or your kitchen table, right? Be safe, use safe practices. All right, so the first thing we want to do is tone this paper. So I want to create a small pile of charcoal dust here in the center, and I'm going to use these little scrap pieces of charcoal and my X-Acto knife, and I'm just going to scrape off some charcoal dust onto the paper. If you don't have any of these small expendable pieces of charcoal, scrap pieces of charcoal, you could take advantage of this opportunity to sharpen one of the sticks that you're going to use for drawing, and then collect and catch the dust down on your sheet of paper. So I've got a pretty good pile going there, and what I want to do next is take this paper towel and gently move around this charcoal dust over the paper. Not using downward pressure. I'm just using side-to-side motion to drag the charcoal over the sheet of paper. My goal here is to get tone, this gray tone over the whole sheet, and it doesn't have to be super dark. So I'm shooting for a tone somewhere in the middle, value 5 or 6 or 4. So you can see I've got most of my charcoal dust here used up, my first go around, and I still got some white areas of the paper that I need to tone. So I'm going to get some more dust going here. Be careful when you're doing this using your X-Acto knife. It's pretty sharp. Getting kind of close to my fingertips here, so I gotta be extra careful so I don't cut myself. Grab my paper towel. Continue moving that charcoal dust around over the paper. Doesn't have to be even and consistent tone over the whole thing. You know, I kind of like to see some of that stripiness, those individual marks in there. That subtlety can be kind of nice. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go with that. So there's my sheet of hand-toned paper. Make sure you clean up after yourself. Make sure that extra dust ends up in the trash, or vacuum it up. All right, so we're ready to draw here. So you can see I've got my toned paper taped up to my drawing board here. Got my still life set up over there. I've got my drawing board set up just to the right of my subject. I'm right-handed, so I'll be drawing with my right hand. This other hand, I can use that to take measurements and side angles and things like that. But I've also got it set up to where I don't have to move so far. My head doesn't have to move so far from my drawing to my subject. So I make an observation and I sketch it in here, reducing the amount of distance and time from that observation to the sketch of it. I've got my drawing paper about at my eye level here. To simplify things in my still life setup, I draped up a black sheet, pinned it up to the wall to cover the surface, the ground that my still life objects are sitting on. Got a variety of objects chosen here. Got this great skull that my brother got me, thanks Jeff. Candle, and a mask, a dust mask. Try to arrange them in an interesting way to help create movement and dynamism, to make the composition more interesting. You can see the overall shape is kind of interesting, right? The bigger shape created here. You know, we've got these implied connections between them. So when you're setting up your still life, think about composition and think about designing your setup. You know, try to make it interesting. A skull to remember and honor. Got a mask there that we're seeing a lot of these days. It's not an N95 mask, but it is a mask that I had laying around for making frames and woodworking. And our candle. Got the candle there to serve as a beacon of hope, that light in the darkness. The candle is also a good symbol for remembrance too, keeping that light going. So a little bit of morbid dark imagery in there maybe perhaps, but also light and hope. You can see also that I've got them arranged on different levels. Got lighting coming from the upper right. Plan out your composition. Think about it a little bit. Try to have fun with that too, and see if you can tell a story. If you like your objects, if you like the subject, if you arrange it a particular way that's pleasing to you, then you'll enjoy the process of drawing it more. I've got here my viewfinder that I'm going to use to help me compose my drawing. So looking at my subject through my viewfinder, noticing the placement of my three main objects within the rectangle of the picture plane. How big are they within that picture plane? Where are they at within that picture plane? So I'm doing a little planning here with my viewfinder. I'm going to start by blocking in my subjects. So I'm looking at the bigger shapes, use some simplified straight lines to kind of block them in. I don't want the block in marks to be super dark, but I do want to be able to see them, right? Top of my skull comes in from the top there a little bit. Block it in. Bottom of the skull. It's going to come down a little bit more, I think. Back of the skull, back here. Not doing a lot of measuring yet. Just want to get the placement of my objects in here first. Candle, and then of course our mask down here in the lower corner. I am paying attention to how parts of my subjects relate to each other, right? So the top part of that mask, if I extend it horizontal over from that top point, where does it intersect the skull, the side of the skull there? I'm thinking about those things as I'm blocking in. This is also helping me find relationships, right? So I know the rightmost part of the mask, if I extend a vertical up from that, it lines up pretty well with the leftmost points on my skull. That's a good relationship that I'm already establishing. Candle is in a holder, right? Where is that? I extend a horizontal across. I'm seeing it's just a little bit below the top of the mask, right? So there's another good relationship. Here's the top of my candlestick holder. Where does the bottom rest in comparison to the mask? I'm thinking this mask needs to come down a little bit. Let's shift that around a little bit more. I can take some more fine-tuned measurements here in a little bit to get a little more accuracy. This block-in is just kind of helping me establish placement of my main, the bigger shapes of my subject here within the picture plane. I'm thinking about lighting this candle here too, at least in my drawing, so that'll be a beacon of light up there that can create a focal point. I've got the light side on my subjects, right? Those are going to be lighter areas through here. So I'm going to kind of have this rhythm established with these lightest parts of my subject of my drawing. I'm going to keep the background, foregrounds relatively simple. There are some nice folds in that sheet that are kind of leading our eye up through here. You know, how much of that do I want to put in there? I put a few. I don't want them to take away from my subject too much. Now that I've got the placement of them, I'm going to switch over to using my straight stick here to get angles and measurements. So got the simplified block in here, and now I want to kind of refine it and get a little more accuracy into it. So what I could start off with is the relationship between the overall height and the overall width of the mask and the skull. A shorter measurement is probably going to be the width from the rightmost point on the skull to the leftmost point. It is a little bit of a shorter measurement from the bottom to the top. So I can make sure that my drawing has that relationship a little more accurate. Looks like it's dead on. Nice. How much space is in between here too, so I'm also paying attention to negative space from the rightmost point on my skull over to the edge of the candlestick. I can measure that. I'll compare that to something else. So maybe I'll see how many of that fit within the overall width of the skull. I'll do that visually first. 1, 2, 3. So it's an approximation, but about a third of the width of this box of the skull is about the spacing that I need from the skull over to the candle. Looks pretty good. What about this relationship here between the candle holder and the overall height of the candle? Get a visual measurement on the candle holder, compare that, see how many fit within the height of the candlestick. 1, 2, that's about half. All right, so if I'm saying that the candle is up there, and if this is the top part of my skull, I'm using some triangulation here, finding the angle from the midpoint of the skull, the very apex of the top, up to the candlestick. If I can find that angle visually, I can use that to help me find the top of the candle. Now, that's coming really close to the top edge of my picture plane. It's going to create a lot of visual tension there, especially when I light that candle on my drawing. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit. So I'm going to do a little editing and make my candle about this high. I want that point of light to be about right there. Our skull. Just going to quickly get these sketched in here. I recommend that you, for more accuracy, you spend a little more time measuring and sighting angles, finding relationships. Eyes. One great technique that I recommend is, and what I'm doing here is I'm sketching, I'm using this technique where I move my eyes quickly back and forth between my drawing and my subject, and that helps me with the accuracy and the placement. Mask down here. be afraid to make changes, right? If I see an initial observation that I need to change, it's not quite right, I'm going to take the time to make that correction. Don't settle. Nice little ellipse through here. I like that. Ellipses are tricky, but they're challenging, and I want challenges, man. Give me those challenges. I like the challenges, right? Because I know from experience that those are the opportunities for learning, for advancement. If I challenge myself, if I see a difficulty and work through it, I know I'm going to learn a lot from that, more so than if I don't take the time and the effort to power through it, to figure it out, to solve it. On the skull, I'm going to establish a center line. This will help me keep everything in place. It's kind of a strange angle. You know, it's not looking straight on. And so that can be kind of tricky. The jaw sticks out a little bit there. So that center line, running that center line through there can help me keep everything in line when I get to the eyes and the nose socket. All that good stuff on there. And I'll do some refining to these. You know, this block in basically just represents my first, second, or third impressions on my subject. I need more observations and measurements and things to get more accuracy. You know, I like to think of the drawing as a process of discovery. What's in front of me is the mystery that I'm presenting to myself to solve. Right? The more clues I have, the clearer the mystery becomes, clearer the story becomes, and hopefully the clearer my drawing will become. Now I'm going to get into some reductive techniques here, and then I've got this block in. I'm going to establish my light shapes. So I've got a white eraser that I've kind of shaped into a wedge and cut into a wedge. Also got my kneaded eraser that I've shaped to a smaller point or wedge. And I'm going to start to remove that tone that I developed in the first part of the drawing to establish these light shapes on my objects. So a candlestick, there's our first easy, simple light shape. It's a very strong vertical element here in my drawing. And this candle does taper. It's wider at the bottom and it gets thinner as it goes up. So I want to keep that in there. There's some light hitting the inside of the candlestick on that, within that ellipse there. Put some of that in there, a little sliver of light. Give us a nice little illusion that we're seeing down into it a little bit. It's below our eye level. There's some great highlights on this candlestick holder. It's metal. I don't want to get too detailed yet. I'm just, again, still focusing on the bigger shapes that I'm seeing, so I can always come back in and put some more of those highlights in down there. The skull, I've got some good highlights on the chin. Of course, my light's coming from the left, so all my light shapes will be mostly over here on this side of the skull. So I'm using my eraser as a drawing tool now. And I'm drawing into that tone, pulling it out. Your eraser is going to get dirty. You want to keep it clean. Wipe it on your pants if you don't mind. Get your pants a little dirty. Highlight on the top of the nose. squinting my eyes here too to help me see kind of these bigger shapes. I don't want to get too caught up in smaller details yet. Establish my light shapes. Got to shape them up a little more. This forehead is really small. Right? I'm going to drop that eye socket down, the eyebrow down a little bit. Some light. His teeth would be something, right, that I'd be really tempted to get into and get lost in the detail, but I'm going to simplify that into a bigger shape of light here first. Other side of the nose socket is catching a little bit of light. Part of the eye socket is. Start to bring some of that out. That chin, right? Pull that out. Those teeth come down pretty well. Cheekbone sticks down. Got my chin sticking out quite a bit there. Maybe a little too far. Go a little too far with the removing of the tone, that's okay. You can always go back and add some more in there. I really like that curve in the eye socket that's catching light over here. That'll be a nice little accent to my drawing. What about this mask? Again, the light side over here. And just like I would with the charcoal, I'm gonna make marks in a specific direction, maybe to help describe the roundness, the contours of the form. This mask is great because it already has ridges in it that kind of wrap around it like that. And you can see those a little bit in there. Bright over here. The string coming off of there. I'll make sure to put that in there. So this shape reads as a mask. It's kind of an odd shape. It's a little abstract. It's kind of rounded. Could be really unclear about what exactly that is, right? So I'm going to put those distinguishing characteristics in there. Those little subtle ridges that run across it. Want to make sure that it appears nice and rounded. I can also put in these little strings. Those strings, elastic bands that keep the mask on our head. Those are some distinguishing things that are going to help me establish that we're looking at a mask. There are some highlights on the folds of the sheet through there. That could be a nice little entrance into the drawing, so I want to keep that. That one kind of coming out at us a little more there. Kind of a little continuation, and I don't want compositionally, I don't want the viewer's eye to run out of the picture plane, so I may de-emphasize that. Now that I've got some of the light shapes established, I can start to go in and establish my darkest dark shapes. There's a real dark shadow shape coming in over here. It's a fold, diagonal fold. This is going to be an important shadow shape because it's going to help establish the left contour of this metal candlestick holder. And if I make this darker through here, it's also going to make the highlight on my candlestick holder pop out even more. shapes back through here. There's a little bit of, yeah, that dark shadow shape continues onto the other side of this candlestick holder. I'm massing in these darker, larger, darker shadow shapes with willow charcoal because it is so dark. But I'm also noticing too, when I go to blend it out, it comes off really easily, right? So in later stages, when I start to develop these a little more and refine them, these light and shadow shapes, probably going to want to switch to some charcoal pencil or compressed charcoal that won't, that'll be nice and dark, but that won't pull off of my paper so much. But for now, the willow charcoal is working well. It's because it is so loose, it's allowing me to make changes, right? Right now in the drawing, I do want to keep my drawing open. I do want to be able to make changes really easily and readily. Dark shadow shapes through here. Not quite as dark. Got that sheet in there, right? So there's going to be some really good folds and things that I can put in there later on. This kind of represents a front corner. So one side is darker, the other side it's lighter. Some cast shadows and things happening over here. Similarly, in our background, go ahead and darken that up a little bit more. Create a nice kind of transition back there. Oops. We're working with tone and value. You want to work in multiple directions. Let's try my kneaded eraser. What does that do? Works pretty well. This big negative space over here, but I'm going to try to activate that with the skull, kind of the gaze of the skull looking up into that area. There's a nice fold, a diagonal fold that kind of comes up in that background. Creates this nice little diagonal shadow shape coming in. I'm going to keep that in there. Don't want it to be too distracting. That background, you want it to remain subtle. You want it to push back in the space, right? So I don't necessarily want anything back there competing with my main subjects. So I'll spend a little more time later to develop that and push and pull it as needed. Kind of has this gradual curve, gestural curve that I really like. Again, this might not be such a good idea. Highlight pulling a eye in there. We'll see what happens. Darken that up a little bit more. Let's go ahead and darken up the background more. So these light shapes, I'm going to have to go back in and refine them more. This drawing is going to need a whole lot more refinement, but the drawing will progress, in this way. Again, start with the bigger shapes and then gradually work towards the smaller ones. As you can see here on this white shape, as much as I erase, and when you're erasing, you don't want to press really hard. I was pressing maybe a little too hard there to try to see how much charcoal I could pull back off of there. But I don't want to press too hard. It's going to damage the paper. What I want to do to make my white shapes more white is to bring in some white medium. For white medium, I'm using a piece of white Conte. I've also got a white charcoal pencil that could work well. For those really bright white parts of the drawing, I'm going to do some more additive technique. I'm adding white medium. That's going to make these highlights, these brightest parts in the light shapes. It's going to make them pop out even more, which is good. What we want. Big old bright highlights over here. Nice defined highlights in our skull. Again, the skull is very complex and very detailed. I'm going to want to spend a little more time to get some of those details in there, but this is kind of fun here, just kind of starting to establish some of those in kind of a painterly, bigger shape, gestural kind of way there. Of course, our candlestick has that really bright edge. Tapers up. What if I put a highlight up there? What if this thing is burning? Give it a little glow around there. These little highlights down here, I want to make sure our viewer reads that as a metallic object, right? So a crisp highlight there is going to help that. So I'm starting with these brightest brights. Those are going to be my brightest brights, the brightest values of the whole drawing. So I'll continue working on this until I'm satisfied with it. So that's our reductive drawing. Essentially we are starting with a middle tone rather than a bright white blank sheet of paper. So that establishes an atmosphere, establishes a mid-range tone right off the bat. Then focus our efforts on the darkest darks and the lightest lights. Have some fun and hope this helps. Let's get to it.